or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're watching this. My name is Estella. I'm a church director and founder of Education Ensemble. Today, we have with us some of our young ensemble members who are going to be chatting about or engaging in dialogue around Hamilton, the musical, which recently or this weekend went up live on Disney Plus for millions of folks around the world to enjoy. And it also just so happened to be the 4th of July weekend. The young folks in our ensemble have a lot to say and share about Hamilton the musical, both in favor of and against. And so I thought it was important to facilitate and host a space where they get to share those views. And then we're gonna share them with you all. So we're here to share them with you all. We're gonna get started with introductions, and I am going to start with Lee.
Hello, my name is Lee Patel. My pronouns are he, him. And I am also a member of Education Ensemble.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a member of Education Ensemble, right? I'm pretty sure I am.
Yes, Chelsea, you are.
Hey guys, my name is Celeste. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also a member of Education Ensemble.
Hello, my name is Oscar, and I'm a part of Education Ensemble here.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a member of Education Ensemble.
So I also want to preface this dialogue or conversation with the fact that nobody on this call or in this chat are experts on any of the topics we're going to engage in, but it doesn't mean that we don't also have opinions. We are all theater folk. At one point, either theater majors or drama geeks in high school, and now as a member of Education Ensemble, also continue to work in the space where art and service intersect or align. And so Hamilton, the musical, gives us pause and a whole lot to think about. As the director of the organization and in this conversation, I'm going to sort of just help facilitate or prompt and moderate, but I want to hear what is on all of your minds about Hamilton the musical. So if we were in my drama class, which all of you are former students of mine, and we were critiquing a piece or a scene, we would work really hard to start with all of the positives in order to uplift and encourage our ensemble members. And so we're gonna run this conversation the same way. Let's start with all of the positives and your general sense and feeling and positives about Hamilton, the show, its impact, implications of the show. Let's go.
Okay, one of the biggest positives for me, or I'll name two for me in particular, is that it offers opportunities in a space that is normally for white people only, both in the audience and on stage and backstage, like everywhere, all around. And so making space, regardless of the show, making space for Black and brown people is really, really important. And then also, that show, it engages me so much. Like, I feel so much while watching it that it's kind of crazy. Like, I remember on the bus ride home after watching it, I just lay in my bench crying about Hamilton being betrayed. And like, this happened like 100 years ago, whatever. Like, why? It was like crying about it, you know? But I don't know. It's a really impactful show, I think.
I agree. It's good to see a show with predominantly people of color and Black people. Yeah, it's just nice to see.
Okay. Celeste, you were in my class when the musical came out. Yeah, and I don't know if, and maybe Oscar also remembers, I don't know if you remember the huge, Jocelyn, you should have been there too. When the musical came out, you three were in my class. So this is what, 5 years ago?
Ooh.
5, 6 years ago, maybe. And the casting call came out for the Pantages tour. It was right before Hamilton went on tour and before we got it in LA. The casting call came out and it basically said, if you're white, like, don't audition. And I'm misquoting. It's not exactly what it said, but that's what people interpreted. And it caused this huge debate in class. And I don't know if you guys remember having it, but it got real heated. It was not what class was about. We weren't even talking about Hamilton. It was not on the docket for the day, but you all got into this heated argument, discussion, whatever you want to call it, about the fact that white people really wouldn't, there's no space in the show for them to be on stage. I want to talk about that again. How, if you can remember how, as a high school drama kid, hearing the news that Hamilton the musical is coming to the Pantages and only Black and brown folk can apply or can audition.
Personally, I think it's brilliant. I think I might have been absent for that class that day, but I do remember that moment when it was like a big deal. And to put it in a,
say which one say.
Okay. Like, let us have this. like every other show on Broadway, and the majority is, you'll see a predominantly white cast. And I mean, that's cool or whatever, but I don't know, it's, like I said, let us have this. It's our opportunity as people of color and Black folks to be like main characters. I mean, there are other roles on Broadway you see where there's like people of color and Black people, like Hairspray, for example, or like West Side Story. But in West Side Story, the people of color are gang members, and then on Hairspray, it's, they're, oppressed, and during that, the 60s, and it's kind of, I have mixed feelings about Hairspray. That's another conversation, but it's good to see main characters that are Black and just shining and being amazing. And yeah.
Which then we'll wait, we'll hold on to it for the critique part, but
yeah,
the main characters in the show actually aren't Black. So that's a whole nother conversation that we need to have, but at least
I'm gonna get back to this part too.
I kind of remember this debate. I remember feeling a lot of things because I was so new to Hamilton. I had just been introduced to it because like I had heard of it, but honestly, the first time I heard it through, I just thought, it's okay. I didn't really listen to that many songs, so I wasn't too hype about it as everybody else. I took the time to listen to it after we had that debate, actually. And by then I'd only heard like 3 songs. So when I heard the news, I was just like, I felt kind of like what Celeste said, like, let us have this. At the same time, I also felt like, what? I feel like when it comes to Broadway roles, specifically Broadway, because it's live theater, I don't see many people that look like me on stage unless they're in West Side Story or in the Heights for like mainstream musicals. So I was super excited, but obviously I wasn't gonna audition, but like I was super excited because I just thought, I'm gonna see more people like me on stage in main roles, not supporting roles, not ensemble, but like the lead roles. And it wasn't lost on me that the characters they were playing were white, but I felt like, what? We've whitewashed enough characters already. And this is probably a really toxic mentality to have, but at the time I was just a really angry kid about the situation. So I was just like, what? They whitewashed damn near almost every other character. So I feel like by now it shouldn't hurt them. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of like the mentality I had at the time. So I was not angry or anything. I thought it was like a win but now looking back, I'm like, I feel like any win would have been enough for me at the time, because I just felt like, you know what, anything is better than nothing. And I feel like that's the kind of a little bit of a wrong mentality to have when it comes to this kind of thing. Because I feel like, you know, you shouldn't just take what you get because they're giving it to you, you know, like, yeah, it's a lead role, but the story itself, you know, the story that they're talking about is a story in which people who are not white, people who are Black and brown, are oppressed, are being enslaved, are being completely dehumanized. So is that really the kind of story you want to be the lead in? I don't know. I feel like that's kind of the question that we should have covered at the time as well. But I think for me, I was just so hyped that finally we were being, you know, noticed.
I don't particularly remember any of this sort of debate that we had, whether it was 6 or 5 years ago. But I do remember that we weren't afraid to actually debate anything at all during those times. So I just don't really remember Hamilton all that well. That being said, just knowing that around the time it was essentially this thing for diversity in a way, having these cast members of different race like join together does like seem to be the ideal like thing for, and I'm talking about like the casting stuff here, not the actual story. I'm just talking how it feels like an ideal thing to place into theater productions.
Thank you. So Lee, you were part of the group that I actually took to see Hamilton live as part of the EduHam program here in LA. So we were able to go see it, and we engaged in a lot of these conversations prior to the show, because the EduHam program asked that we dig into these conversations and that you produced your own pieces. And we talked a lot about what Jocelyn just alluded to on the bus ride home from the show. So what was your experience with watching it live and some of those conversations we had?
So I think I've been lucky to see theater be diverse just through your class, because we've been on field trips, lots and lots of field trips to shows, not necessarily Broadway shows like Hamilton, but just shows that are like really diverse, really diverse, and tell the stories of people like us. And so I've been lucky in that sense. And so that's why Hamilton, upon watching it, I didn't really give it a critical eye. I just thought, oh my God, we're gonna go see Hamilton. This is insane. I can't believe that I got this opportunity, you know? And then, you know, like as time goes on, like you look back on it with a more critical eye and you're like, why is this piece of like almost, I guess, propaganda being so glorified by all of America? Like, it's kind of universal to love Hamilton, I guess. You can call it cringy, you can call it whatever, but it's you like it. It's a good musical. I don't care what you say, you like it. It's fun to listen to. It's an enjoyable show to watch. But I don't know, as more time has gone on, the more of a critical eye I can give to it. But at the time, I was just kind of blown away that we got the opportunity to see something so revolutionary.
As an educator, my perspective, or theater educator specifically, my perspective is a lot of what you all are saying. When the musical came out, I already being a fan of Lin-Manuel after In the Heights, I was excited or ready to support whatever he was bringing to Broadway anyway. I was really excited when Hamilton came out. I wanted to support the work of Lin-Manuel after the success of In the Heights, because In the Heights had given us exactly what you all were talking about. It was first time we had seen an all Latin cast, Latin Black cast on Broadway, or at least for the most part. I don't know if like every single person were identified as both Black or brown, but it was the first time I had ever seen anything like that. And when I became a drama teacher, my goal is kind of still there. I cannot wait to direct a production of In the Heights. Like that's the show that I really, really want to direct one day, because my kids would be able to star in a production that they don't have to think really hard about the character and how it aligns to who they are. And I remember, and I don't think Jocelyn remembers, but it stuck with me. I remember Jocelyn saying something to the effect of, when the casting call came out, it's funny to me that you said, of course I'm not going to audition, because when you were in my drama class, when that casting call came out, you said, I get to audition to be on. And it stuck with me because I was just, and then I was like, yeah, go. Pantages is right there. Take the bus, go audition. Or to the church that they were holding them at. And that stuck with me because in that moment, I realized the impact of a show like Hamilton. Though we have a lot to critique, it gave a whole lot of hope, right? Like I get to see myself on Broadway. I see myself on Broadway. This is a mass, big budget production on Broadway, and they're raking in millions, and it is an all Black, brown cast, and I get to be a part of that maybe one day, right? And that was not lost on me, because Lee mentioned, I take you all to see theater a lot, and luckily here in LA, we have a whole lot of options. We got to saw Zoot Suit, and for the anniversary run of the show, we got to see brand new works from Susan Laurie Parks. We've gone to see like really great, impactful works that tell our stories, in addition to other classics. But Hamilton was like taking us out of LA and reaching and dreaming for Broadway. And so that was really important for me as a teacher, and I think it's still very special. But also as a teacher, it does also allow for room and space for us to have those harder conversations that some of you were alluding to. Yeah, Chris Jackson is definitely my favorite in Hamilton as George Washington. And then I repeat the sentence again in my head and I go, George Washington, not my favorite person in history. And then I, as a viewer and educator, have to, what's the word? Find peace, reconcile that. And that was a question that came up in the documentary. If anybody watched the PBS documentary, they were asked, like, how did you reconcile that? And I can't recall what their reasoning was, or how they did it. But I'm willing to bet that several of the cast members probably still haven't, right? Like, how do you reconcile with that? Like, Daveed Diggs plays an amazing Jefferson, but Jefferson. So let's move on to some of our critiques. I'm gonna throw it to Celeste first.
Okay. If it's okay with you, I'm just gonna read what I wrote. Okay. So a cast that's predominantly Black folks and people of color does not cancel out the whitewashing of another retelling of our American history. I feel like it's a continued glorification of these terrible men using hip hop and rap to make it more palatable. But I also feel biased because I've been in love with the theater as far back as middle school, and I especially love musicals. As a biracial theater kid of color, it was refreshing to see more roles available for people who look like me, especially lead roles where the storyline wasn't centered around us being, criminals, West Side Story, or like just a backstory and another story about a white person on Hairspray. But casting folks in a show about a story, I don't know if this makes sense, but casting folks in a show about a story portraying men who would have enslaved the people playing them back in their day, it almost feels worse in a way. I don't know. I have a love-hate relationship with this show. So, you know, a part of me is I'm watching it and I'm like captivated and just like in awe and wow of this like incredible performance, these incredible performances by these amazing actors and singers. And but then stuff like, for example, and What Did I Miss, where W. Diggs is just being like the most, I don't even know, I don't even have words for it. He's just amazing. It's a masterpiece. An incredible Jefferson, lines like via lamb Sally, why don't you open it, kind of takes you out of it in that moment. It's like, oh yikes, like can I be enjoying this right now? Or things like Hamilton being portrayed as someone who you know, fought against slavery, which I don't know if it's true or not, but he was married to a Schuyler sister, and I believe her family owned slaves. So it's like, I feel like you're painting these people in a much better light than they are. Same thing with you said, going back to what you said about Washington, like you want to like these characters, but then you remember like how they're not good people at all. They're like monsters, in my opinion. Uh, yeah, but there's little things here and there that paint these people in a better light and glorify them, like, you know, we'll never be free until we end slavery, or immigrants, we get the job done, that make you want to like root for these characters and just make them seem relatable. But then like you have to really stop yourself and remember like, I shouldn't be liking these people. I don't know. Yeah.
Valid. I was reading something about precisely about that line, immigrants, we get the job done, and the ways in which Hamilton in this musical is portrayed as rags to riches immigrant coming over from the Caribbean and rising to stardom and fame without a whole conversation about, does he truly represent the immigrants coming from that region, or, you know, does he? Anyone else? Some of your critiques? Go ahead, Chelsea.
I actually have something to say about that. So, Hamilton was actually part of the numerous white people fleeing to America because of the part of the Caribbean he was in. African people outnumbered Europeans 20-1, and there was too many slave rights going on. So he left because of that. So I think it's really tone deaf to have him rapping about being an immigrant, using Black music to uplift himself as a white passing Latinx person. It's just really like he stole slaves for his family. Maybe he himself wasn't a slaver, but he married into a slaver family. And I don't know. Lin-Manuel actually, the book that this musical is based off of, it's only written by one person, and this person, his name is Ron Chernow. He has numerous books trying to paint these racist and founding fathers as heroes, like Ulysses Grant. It's not a good look. It's really, really not a good look. And then making yourself the main character, I don't know.
My relationship to hip hop and theater is a strong one. It can never be broken. And so watching Hamilton, when I took you all to see it, or Lee and others to see it, I couldn't stop geeking out at, you know, I was just like, what? That's a Biggie line. Like, what? Like, that's a sample from. Then there's a part in the Schuyler. What song is it? It's the Toast number. I forgot the name of the song right now. Is that what it is? The groom. A toast to the groom. Okay. In that number, I'm pretty. Is it that one? No, it's Helpless. It's in Helpless. There's a boy. The boy is mine line. When we were watching it live, I was like, Brandy and Monica. So I couldn't stop noticing the ways and places in which hip hop was so intricately a part of the show, to even looking at the set design, the stage, and I'm a tech, And so I was paying close attention to the walls, to the lights, to and to the set. The stage is actually 2 turntables, right? Like it is legit 2 turntables, and everything centers around those 2 turntables. And so I felt in that way like hip hop is so essential to the core of the show. Then at the same time, hip hop is so essentially core to the show, about these enslavers and founding fathers who, when hip hop was birthed and founded, it is about destroying all of that and dismantling all of that, and it is about uprising and lifting up people and going against oppressive systems and structures. That's hip hop. And so part of me, it's literally a back and forth. I was like, oh, dang, that's terrible. Why he do that? Why he use hip hop to tell the story? Then at the same time, I was like, no, that's exactly why use hip hop to tell this story. But no, because Mike can't afford to actually see the show. So who is the show for?
Yeah, that's a really important question.
Well, yeah, the white people need to see the show. But then I was like, but what, they think they're all heroes. Like it's a literal back and forth. And I can't, there's no reconciliation in me. I can't. So anybody else on your critiques, other critiques?
For me, it like usually when I watch something, I'm like, oh, that was fun, that was good. And then like it takes a little bit for me to process and think about it and be like, oh, okay. So that's what this is, okay, And that's what happened with Hamilton for sure. Like I was starstruck at first, like I said earlier. And it's lines like immigrants, we get the job done in a show about colonizers. Like immigrants, yeah. Colonizers,
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about that. So like you guys said, it felt really tone deaf, and there's days where I'm like, yeah, I can listen to Hamilton all day, like burn, yes. And then there's some days where I'm like, it grates at my nerves so much, and it just frustrates me so much just listening to the music. Like that's why I haven't even watched it, because I don't know how I'm gonna feel about watching it now that I got such mixed emotions about it. Like there's no way for my brain to reconcile it. Like for you, they're just two completely opposing ideals, and I understand why. I think they were necessary for the time for theater to change, but it shouldn't be the standard going forward at all. Like there's plenty of stories throughout history that revolve around Black, Indigenous, person of color, or people of color's like triumph versus their enslavement and genocide, that we can tell with actual Black and brown folks, and totally leave white people out of it. Like we don't need to make space for them, especially like in a show about them, if that makes sense.
A really big part of me asks, like, did this show become popular because it's a story about white men? Or did it become popular because, like, of its use of music and hip hop and how it's revolutionizing, like, what Broadway should look like? Like, I can't tell if white people like it because it's something new and different and, like, the standard we should be setting forward, or because it's about, you know.
I think about that too. I'm like, if it was a hip hop musical about like, I don't know, these other big, what's the word?
To that point, the Tupac musical did not do well.
I didn't even know there was a Tupac musical.
I was excited for that show to come out. But I didn't ever get to hear it or see it. before it shut down. It did not have the same rise to fame that this show has had. And y'all know me and Tupac. So I couldn't wait for that to like do well and then go on tour so that I can see it. I have to wait for it to come to the West Coast. But that didn't happen. So
Yeah, like, I don't know how to say his name. I'm going to mess it up, so I'm just gonna call him what everybody else calls him, Oak. He plays Hercules Mulligan and James Madison in Hamilton. So he was actually casted as a lead in The Great Comet of 1812. He played Pierre, and he only did that show for 2 weeks before they took him off and replaced him with a white actor. And they did that because he wasn't selling tickets, apparently.
Oh, like
So,
he
like,
digs and Hedwig.
yeah.
yeah. And because of that controversy, they ended up closing the show down. And he said like he was never gonna go back to that show, which is super valid. I wouldn't expect anybody to go back after that, but it's like I don't know how to explain the like sour taste in my mouth regarding it.
I feel like going back to Chelsea's question of like what made the show popular, and I feel like it's that it made hip hop accessible for white audiences and made it like digestible. Like they get to watch it through, like they get to see hip hop as like a thing that the founding fathers had fun with, and like, yeah, we're all buddy buddy, and I didn't rape my slaves or use their teeth as my dentures, like, you know. So I think it made white audiences comfortable with it, if that makes sense, because it was telling stories about white people, but also played by Black and brown people.
So it gave folks a chance to see their heroes as heroes again.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, because hip hop, white folks enjoying hip hop, I feel like that's a whole nother conversation on the commodification of hip hop, and we ain't got time for all that. But that's kind of a common thread of how our music is bought and sold and then given back to us in this sort of distorted image of ourselves.
Right.
After other hands has touched it, which is essentially what this show does too. So I just want to point out that we have like 12 pages of notes and things that we wanted to talk about, but I have drifted away from it because you all are just talking. So any other critiques, and feel free to look back at the notes that you made and go ahead and share.
When we were in the chat and I was like writing my whole little paragraph thing, I said that I was going to do more research because it had been about like a year and a half that I've even had anything to do with the show in terms of listening to it and watching stuff about it. And I kind of fell into a deep dark hole of like people reacting to it when it first came out, like a whole bunch of videos where they were like leaving like reviews and stuff. And one in particular was a group of old white people who they had watched like the trailer for the show, and a lot of them were like, oh, this is good for the young kids, you know, and a history lesson they can digest. But then like a good chunk of them were like, why are they all Black and brown? If it's a story about white people, we should be truthful, because if not, then young people who probably haven't even gone to that chapter of history yet are going to think that these people are heroes. And I thought that's a lot of our opinion, which is like, you know, if you don't know the history about it, and this is like your first, I guess, introduction into it, that's kind of just a little bit like, I don't want to say awful, because it's not like he's, you know, out here saying that his version is the only version, but I still want to say it's dangerous because it is a really popular show and a lot of people love it and say amazing things about it. And I mean, the actors themselves are not responsible for their characters' past actions. Like, obviously, you know, these are actors, they're not these people. So I don't think it's fair to say that, oh, you know, they were masterminds behind this thing. Because I also saw an article saying that, oh, were the actors in on completely wiping out white actors from it? Like, no, that wasn't it. At least not the original cast, because that's what I read in the article, that they were blaming them for wanting these roles that were originally for white actors, and the show was never really meant for white actors. Lin never really wanted white actors. So I just feel like it is important to, it is hard, because I'm troubled with it, because I know the history. For us, we know the history. We know the truth. We know what these people did, what's not in the history books. We know what we're not taught in class. And we watch this show, and it doesn't really shed a light on that. And I mean, there's like lines here and there that are like, you know, they're great on paper. They're great when they're sung. They sound amazing for protest posters and all that. And if you guys saw the protests, there were a lot of posters out there with Hamilton quotes on them. They're great, but they're not telling a full picture, and I think that full picture is important. And I think it's a very comfortable for people to just kind of disregard the full picture, because they have this little piece of art that tells them, hey, you know, they can be good people too. I don't know. I that's just kind of how I could simplify the very complex atmosphere that I was feeling. But yeah, when I heard like all of them, like all the elderly white people say that, hey, you have to be truthful, a lot of people in the comments were mad. They were like, oh, these are racist and sold people. They just want to see more white people on Broadway, as if there isn't enough already. And I feel like, okay, that's probably true. They're probably mad at seeing, you know, people of color in lead roles. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, they're not far off, because these people, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, aren't exactly heroes. They're founding fathers, sure. They found the country, but I mean, what country did they find? What country are we living in? Yeah. What kind of country are we in, and how do they treat people that are of that color?
Just so yeah, that you made about folks saying that we should learn the actual history. That's funny, because so I just watched, I think it was a TikTok. I saw a TikTok of this kid who had just watched Hamilton on Disney Plus, and he was like, oh my God, the most powerful moment of the show is the last moment, that gasp from Eliza at the very end. And then he says, that was Lin-Manuel showing Eliza, the audience at the show, answering the question, who tells your story? Like telling her that we told the story. And that TikTok, I was like, this kid has a point. Like that's probably what that gasp was supposed to be. Because me, it's the first time I saw it, I was like, did she see a ghost? Like, but that actually makes a lot of sense, because the tagline is who tells your story, and then in that last song, what you keep hearing in the background is who tells your story. And it made me think about a book that I read in college called Lies My Teacher Told Me. Is that the name of the book? No. It is Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong, by James Lowen. And in that book, he says, if you truly want students to take an interest in American history, then stop lying. And I know that to be true, because when you all were in my classes, none of you are in my classes anymore. When you all were in my classes, we very often got into these conversations and debates about issues and topics that were probably presented to you in one way, but someone just mentioned the story isn't whole. The whole story isn't there. And I think that is a real danger of this show, right? Because a whole new generation of drama kids are going to come up knowing the music to Hamilton, thinking Jefferson was awesome because Daveed Diggs is awesome, but not Jefferson. And I gotta tell you, Celeste, when we saw it live, when he got to that line, my body, like, I shook. I was like, ugh, like that's ew, no, like I can't. That line was way too much. It definitely took me out of it for a good like 5 minutes before I could like jump back into it. It was a lot of what I felt when we went to go see Latin History for Morons. Yeah, so when we went to go see Latin History for Morons by John Leguizamo, again, we were really excited. We were like, this one-man show with this man of color, like, this is gonna be awesome. We're gonna love this. And then 5 minutes in, I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I can't take it. And I kept having to like, it was like I was trying to play a game of double dutch. Like I was like to it, and I just couldn't. I gave up after intermission. I was like, yeah, I'm done. I can't. This is, and I felt a lot of that watching Hamilton. But the only thing that kept me in Hamilton was the actual music. Like I could sing along. So anyway, any other thoughts? We didn't even cover half of what you wanted to talk about. Guys, like,
I got one more thing.
Okay, go.
I think that like the ham for ham stuff, I think that the production team could have done a lot better job of spending that time educating people on the full picture. Like, if you're going to have this incredible show with so many people attending and so many people hearing you could have done a much better job at educating them, or being like, hey, take this with a grain of salt, do your own research, or here are some like resources that you could learn more. Like, I know they did that with us. Like, they told us to look into it, write our own piece, but I feel like the effort from the producer and directors was very, very minimal, especially with what they had to say on like the Black Lives Matter stuff going on and the delayed response.
I have a question for everyone in the chat. Because you mentioning Ham for Ham, we think about like, how do you guys feel about this show that has a full cast of people who look like us, but may not be accessible for people who look like us because it's on Broadway and the tickets are like $1 gazillion? How do you guys feel about that?
Very bitter, especially because Lin-Manuel himself has said that if you pirate, you're dirt.
It just makes me really, really angry and frustrated because, like, then you really, really know who this show was made for. You know it wasn't made for Black and brown folks. Not everyone can go see, like, this hunt. I think we sat in the mezzanine, right? Like, up. And those tickets are, like, $200, and we're all the way in the back. Like, what? That's unbelievable. And then for one ticket, $200. If your whole family wants to go, that's like $1,000 you blow sitting way in the back watching a theater production. Like, that's unbelievable. And the people that have that kind of money are like the white patrons of theaters. Like, it wasn't the show put on in Puerto Rico, and tickets were still priced like unbelievably high, and so the people of Puerto Rico couldn't even attend the show and watch it.
I have no idea. I'm not gonna speak to it because I Googled that yet.
Okay.
That show was supposed to be a charity to give back to the Puerto Rican people. So yeah, there's expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe was to make them pricey so that you can raise tons of money, I hope, and then give it to Puerto Rico. That's what I hope.
What about showing the show to Puerto Ricans? Like, it's the same, like, cognitive dissonance that I feel like we're going through just thinking about brown people playing white people, Like, this show is for us, but we can't go see it because it costs thousands of dollars to take our family to see it. Like, we know who the audience is just because of that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And so I think that that's a good question, Celeste. I think part of, I can't speak for other people, but what I think or imagine the intent behind EduHam and Ham for Ham was to make sure that young folks had access to it. And so it still then becomes this really elite thing, right? Like, you know, we got 50 seats or 50 tickets for our district, or for our school, and then another in our district also had about, 50 seats. So that's, let's say 100 kids from our region of Los Angeles, we're in South Los Angeles, got to go see that show. And then, the chaperones. That's not enough, but then that also speaks to a much larger issue with Broadway itself. We can't afford Broadway tickets to nothing. This is why we don't go to the Pantages that often, because sorry guys, I don't have it like that. Like I can't take you. So it definitely speaks to a larger issue that we would have with any Broadway show, but I think in particular for this show, it matters even more, is what you're saying, because we imagine that the show is for us, supposed to be by us, for us, and we can't go see it. And yeah, I had that same thought. So then who is the show really for? I feel like mass amounts of people are ready and willing to accept this show as the standard, because for so long there's been such a void of space for Black and brown folks on Broadway. And it doesn't have to be that. We can demand better. Hamilton is a good show. It is a fantastic Broadway musical with beautiful sets and scenery and costumes and super creative, imaginative ways of using lighting and set design to bring us this magical piece of theater. The spaces in which Black and brown folks get to show up on Broadway or in live theater, it does not have to be a play about our oppressors or the systems which continue to oppress us. It doesn't have to be a sanitized version of these founding fathers or anyone like them. We can demand better. Like Lee alluded to, there are tons of stories that can be told. And so then I guess I go back to the question, who tells your story? It's gotta be us, right? Like we can't wait and depend on Broadway or the people in charge of Broadway to create space for us. We've got to create our own spaces. We can have roles for us, shows for us, that do not also glorify our enslavement, that are not an ode to a failed experiment into imperialism or colonization or capitalism. I think all of you young folks made a lot of valid points about the show, everything that's great about it and everything that's wrong with it. This was a very brief conversation, and so we didn't really dig into a lot of what you all had planned to talk about. We didn't even have a chance to talk yet about the Hamilton mixtape and the songs and artists who were on that and what that represents or means and why it matters. I hope that everyone who enjoyed the show on Disney Plus took a moment to watch the credits, the whole credits. I did, and while watching the credits, another thought I had was, I wonder how many spaces on the cruise were designated for, allotted to Black and brown folk, and whether or not we were given the opportunity or chance to show up backstage as much as we were on stage. Because I think that sometimes what happens when we get to shine on stage is it feels like we're doing a song and dance for white folks' enjoyment. And so I'm wondering and hoping that people who look like you, my students, and myself were just as prevalent backstage on this cast and crew. Two things that I want to talk about before I totally wrap. One, I think it was intentional that it was released on 4th of July weekend for everyone to watch, which I hope encourages folks to have longer, deeper conversations about the 4th of July and what that truly means and represents, and who it leaves out. I am appreciative that major Broadway hits can be streamed because, like you all mentioned or alluded to, I can't afford to take you all to the Pantages too often, if at all. And so having Broadway caliber productions being able to stream to us is, I do think, a great thing to provide access, but what would be even better if we provided access to the theater. So enjoy Hamilton and then engage in some really tough conversations about Hamilton.